I've been driving a cab in New York for 22 years, and you learn fast how to recognize when someone gets in the car with heavy baggage in the back seat. That late afternoon, she got in a way I won't forget. Old suitcase covered in stickers, a blouse with a NASA logo, an official ID hanging around her neck. But what caught my attention the most was that Colombian accent when she dropped a "Queens, please," that carried a whole lifetime of struggle compressed into 2 syllables. You know that way of speaking from someone who knows exactly where they came from and doesn't want to go back? It was that. She took a deep breath as she closed the door, like someone dropping a heavy weight off their back after a grueling shift. And in the rearview mirror, I could see there was something different there. It wasn't just the exhaustion of a regular day. It was the glow of someone who had arrived somewhere they weren't supposed to be. At the first red light on 5th Avenue, she broke the silence the way people with a story to tell always do, staring out at the street as if the whole city was to blame for her needing to talk, and she dropped a question that wasn't rhetorical. Have you ever stopped to think about what you would do with $300? She wasn't just asking to ask. That question had weight. I turned a little to hear better because I have enough experience to know when a passenger is ready to unload their whole life in a 40-minute ride. She then started to tell me that she arrived in 2003 straight at JFK Airport, not on vacation but a permanent move, with that money she mentioned in her pocket and an address written on a crumpled piece of paper, the house of a cousin she had never seen in person, only in old photos passed around at family gatherings. Her father had lost everything when the company he worked for as an engineer went bankrupt overnight. The kind of story you hear and pray never happens to your family. She was only 19 years old back then. 19. The age when people are planning road trips or college parties. She was closing the door on an entire country behind her. When she got to her cousin's shared apartment, a cramped room with 2 other girls who also had stories like that, she landed her first job at an office cleaning company. $8 an hour, off the books, no insurance, paid in cash on Fridays. She would wake up at 4 in the morning, take 3 different buses crossing the entire city, and arrive at the glass and steel buildings on the Avenue of the Americas while the executives were still sleeping in the apartments she was going to clean. You know that moment when you discover that real life is much harder than you imagined? Yeah, that happened every single morning for her. But what really hurt, the part she said with her voice cracking a little, wasn't exactly the work. It was the invisibility. She walked past people, cleaned up after people, moved furniture that people left for her to move, and nobody, literally nobody, said good morning. She went 6 months without a single greeting. It's like, you're there, existing, working, but to everyone around, you're just the air they walk through without paying attention. I turned to her at that red light and said something I learned in 2 decades in this car. When you're invisible to everyone, you discover you have 2 paths. Accept it, or turn it all into fuel. She nodded heavily, and it was as if she knew that crossroads well, the one every person who started from the bottom knows. She adjusted her body in the back seat as we passed Central Park, and it was at that moment I realized the story was going to get heavier. She had that tone in her voice, you know, when someone takes a deep breath before telling the part that really hurts. After a year cleaning offices, she had saved up $2,400. An amount that for us who work by the hour is practically a miracle of God. With that money, she enrolled in a community college in Queens engineering course. But here comes the thing nobody who lives in comfort understands. For her family, that was too obvious. Of course, the immigrant girl with an opportunity was going to study. Nobody celebrated. Nobody recognized that she had just done the impossible, working and saving simultaneously while her entire body begged for rest. What nobody from the hood knows is the invisible cost of that, "No, I'm fine." She kept cleaning mansions during the day, now in 2 shifts, and at night she went into the classroom to try to understand formulas that looked like they were written in an alien language. Every professor was a mountain. Every class, proof that she shouldn't be there. She told me about a specific day when the professor asked her to answer a question and she stuttered, not because she didn't know, but because fear locked her tongue. Silence in the whole room. Then a classmate laughed quietly. That kind of laugh you feel in your spine. She knew he was laughing at her, not with her. And in that moment, she felt that weight of being the different one, of having an accent, of having hands dried out from cleaning products while others had perfect manicures. The money she earned disappeared fast. $1,200 for rent in a shared place, $300 on food, rice, beans, cheap chicken from the Chinese market, soy milk to save on dairy, $150 on transportation, gas, documents. There was $100 left over that she kept in $1 coins in a glass jar in the kitchen, that kind of jar you see in old movies. She called it the jar of the impossible, because every dollar she put in there represented a dream. Her parents called on WhatsApp using stolen Wi-Fi data from the street, worried, "Honey, do you want to come back? Your dad found a job here." And she lied to them. "It's going well, Mom, I'm safe." But the truth was, she oscillated between starving and giving up, between one and the other, every day choosing which version of ruin was more tolerable. I stopped at a red light on 42nd Street and dropped something I've seen happen many times in this car. The easiest moment to abandon a dream is exactly when you're so exhausted, you can't see the end of it anymore. She looked at me in the rearview mirror, and those eyes, which had already seen so much, blinked as if something had clicked. As if she recognized that truth she was already living every day. She nodded heavily, because that's how we recognize truths that hurt, with a head movement that feels like it weighs tons. And this is where she stopped talking for a moment, looking out the window as we passed buildings she had cleaned, reflecting each one of them on her tired face. I felt there was more coming, much more. Because that period she was talking about, that combo of cleaning, studying, hunger, sacrifice, was just the beginning of a cliff she still had to climb down. And I know this point in the story. It's when everything starts to get worse before it gets better. In her sophomore year of college, something changed inside her. Not in a dramatic way, not like those movies where the person has a collapse and everyone sees. It was slow. It was like water boiling slowly. So slowly, you don't even notice it's hot until you burn your hand. She woke up without wanting to wake up. She cleaned without feeling what she was cleaning. Automatic hand scrubbing surfaces, mind somewhere else. She sat in class with her eyes open, but her mind completely closed. Like those glass doors that look open, but you bang your head on them. One night, she was so tired she didn't even remember if she had eaten that day, if she had ingested something, or just drank water to trick her stomach. She went into the shared bathroom of that apartment, that bathroom that always smelled like mold, humidity, and despair, and simply sat on the cold floor and cried. Not in a contained way, not that silent crying. It was that crying you can't control, that makes noise, that makes other people hear. Nobody asked if she was okay. Nobody knocked on the door. She told me that on that weekend, sitting on that filthy floor, she really thought about giving up. Not in a dramatic way like we see in series, that kind of dark thought. No, it was worse than that. It was that quiet resignation, the one that comes with cold logic. I'll work in a store, I'll get married, I'll have a normal life. And that's not bad. Seriously, it isn't. But for her, accepting that was accepting being inferior. It was accepting that that professor was right, that she didn't deserve to be there, that people from the bottom had their place. And that was it, like she was ready to become an invisible ghost inside her own life, to accept the narrative society had written for people like her. Here is where something comes in that few understand. She took $300 out of the impossible jar, that money she was saving for an emergency, and paid for a therapy session. Not just any therapy. She looked for a psychologist who was also an immigrant, because she knew only someone who had been through that could understand without needing an explanation. The woman was from Nicaragua, had been through similar things, and in the first session said something so simple it should be obvious but isn't. You are not weak. You are tired. There is a giant difference. Weak quits and that's it. Tired sleeps and wakes up again. That phrase, and I can tell you this because I've heard it from a lot of people in this car, that phrase changes your brain chemistry. It doesn't solve the problem, but it changes the way you relate to it. I slid my eye to the rearview mirror as we passed the Brooklyn Bridge, and I saw she had tears running down her face as she retold that period. But, and this is important, they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of recognition. The kind you cry when you look in the mirror and realize how much you've suffered but managed to keep going. like that hug you've been waiting for years and someone finally gives you. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes with the sleeve of that NASA blouse she wore underneath, as if that uniform was a shield, and it was in that moment, passing by the bridge lights, that she went silent. A silence that wasn't empty, but full of things. Because before getting to the best part, before getting to the moment where everything turned around, there was a worse part still. There was a rock bottom she still needed to hit. And I felt it in the air, that weight that comes before the final drop. Semester 4 of college hit with the force of a hurricane. She had been rejected from 14 different scholarship programs, 14 no's, 14 letters she kept all together in a brown envelope she called her reality check. 14 times hearing she wasn't good enough, didn't have enough of a resume, that there were more qualified candidates. And there's a detail she told me with anger in her voice. There was an advanced calculus professor, a white man in his 60s, that type who speaks with the confidence of someone who's never been questioned in his entire life, who asked her in class why she didn't consider a technical program more appropriate for her profile. Appropriate. You know what appropriate means when it comes from the mouth of someone like that? It means follow the path that people like you follow. Don't try to be something you're not. That word got tattooed in her mind. On that specific weekend, she described to me, and I saw she closed her eyes remembering it. She didn't go to college. She called in, lied saying she was sick, didn't go to the cleaning job either. Simply stayed in the shared bed in that apartment, lying next to two other girls who were also in their own personal hells, each carrying her own weight. And here comes the part that a lot of people don't understand about giving up. It's not a moment of decision. It's a slow slide into the darkness. You lie down, close your eyes, and just stay there waiting for time to pass. Waiting for tomorrow to be just as bad as today, so you have permission to officially quit. But on that rainy Saturday, one of the girls, a girl from Brazil who cleaned with her, who had also come from far away, who also knew that taste of being lost, sat on the edge of the bed and asked a question that seemed simple, but was anything but simple. Why are you giving up for free? Just that. 6 words. And those 6 words exploded like a bomb. Because understand this, giving up is one thing. Giving up for free, in silence, hidden, like a thief in the night, is another. It's losing even the right to have been defeated with dignity. That girl was saying, if you're going to give up, at least have the courage to look in the eyes of whoever killed your dream. At least be honest about it. Don't quit hidden on a rainy Wednesday, alone, without a witness. I heard that conversation happen inside that taxi, her retelling it with details, and it reminded me of something I've seen happen hundreds of times in 2 decades. The moment when someone decides they'd rather die trying than live hiding. She looked at me in the rearview mirror and said, "That conversation gave me permission to breathe. Not to win, not to succeed, just to breathe. And breathing, when you're drowning, is everything." That weekend of giving up turned into a weekend of rest, of honesty. And on Monday, she went back. Not because she was better. She went back because she had decided that if she was going to fail, she was going to fail head-on, with her eyes open, and not behind life's back. And it was right after that return that the thing that changes an entire life happened. Because when you decide you're going to fight, not because you believe you're going to win, but because you simply can't live hiding, that's when the universe starts sending you signals. It's as if you screamed so loud on the inside that the whole world could hear, and the next person she would meet, the one who would arrive like an angel in an apartment on the Upper East Side, was already on the way. I could feel it in the air of the taxi. I felt the story was starting to turn. She changed cleaning companies, not for a promotion, out of necessity, really. She needed to get more hours, make more money. And that's how she started working in luxury residential buildings on the Upper East Side, those restored mansions where every wall has a history. Every piece of furniture costs more than a car. Huge plants in vases that look like art, photos of trips around the world hung like trophies of conquest. It was depressing cleaning those places because you saw money in everything, not in quantity, but in quality, in the way things were chosen, treated, respected. And she was there, spraying disinfectant on marble countertops, seeing that life up close but knowing there was an invisible door separating her from all of it. One day, while cleaning an apartment on 77th Street at the corner of Park Avenue, that kind of address you hear and already feel is a place for different people, the owner came back earlier than expected. A woman in her 70s, short white hair, eyes that transmitted intelligence and calm at the same time. And she saw my passenger sitting in the kitchen during a cleaning break, with a quantum physics book open. It wasn't a magazine, it was a real book, difficult, the kind you only read because you really need to understand. The woman didn't do that thing rich people do, that thing where they pretend they don't see and sneak away. She sat down simply and asked, "Are you studying?" It wasn't a boss's question. It was a human-to-human question. And it was in that moment that everything changed trajectory, because she confessed everything. The college, the 14 rejections kept like scars, the exhaustion that weighed more than the suitcase she carried, the fear that that professor was right. And the woman listened, didn't interrupt, didn't give unsolicited advice, didn't try to fix anything, just listened. Made coffee while she talked, offered her a spot on the sofa to sit, on a sofa that cost more than a year of her rent, and let that girl feel she was seen, for real, not as a cleaning lady, as a person. When the woman revealed who she was, a physics professor at MIT for 40 years, retired now but still a research consultant, it was as if the whole world changed color. "I had a career because someone saw potential in me when I was invisible too," she said, and then added, "I'm going to help you." But it wasn't that good luck you got this kind of help. It was real help. This woman became what she called a miracle manager. She got her free private tutoring in exchange for faster cleaning, pointed her to mentorship programs that existed, but nobody in the poor neighborhoods knew about. And the most important thing, when that calculus professor gave a low grade she thought was unfair, this woman went personally to talk to the department. She didn't ask for a favor. She demanded a test review, and he regraded everything. She got an A. I drove in silence for a moment, processing all that, and then I turned to her and said something I learned in 2 decades in this taxi. The world doesn't change because you deserve it to change. The world changes because one person, a single person, decides they're going to change it, that they're going to sacrifice their time, their credibility, their courage, to believe in someone nobody believed in. She nodded heavily, with that weight that comes from understanding a truth so deep it hurts. And then she completed. And that was where I started keeping my eyes open. I started understanding that when someone offers to help you for real, you don't let it pass. You grab onto that person like they're the last buoy in an ocean. And it was at that moment of the ride, passing by those same buildings where she had that transformative encounter, that she made a silent decision. Because that woman had shown her there was a path, not an easy path, not a fast path, but a real path. A path where you can go from invisible to extraordinary. And she was going to follow that path, whatever the cost. Because now she had more than hope. She had proof it was possible. With a real mentor by her side, everything started to accelerate. Not because things got easy, but because for the first time she had someone who knew the game, who knew the invisible rules nobody teaches us from the hood. She wasn't invisible anymore. Now she was that girl who studies quantum physics while cleaning mansions. And there's a giant difference between being invisible and being known. That MIT woman introduced her to an entire community of immigrants who were engineers, people who had come from farms, from the streets, from poverty, and had arrived in positions of respect. For the first time in her life, she saw her suffering reflected in other people's faces. And at the same time, she saw the solutions. One of them, a Nicaraguan man who had worked on a coffee plantation when he was young, then became a civil engineer, said something that became a mantra for her. "We don't compete for a seat at the table. We build a new table." You know what that means? It means when you come from the bottom, you're not fighting for the crumbs that are left. You are building your own banquet. She left community college, that college that was the entry door, and managed to get into a real university. Not Harvard, not MIT, but a respectable CUNY with a partial scholarship program. And here comes the part few people understand about real sacrifice. She kept cleaning mansions during the day. Now she was taking aerospace engineering at night, the most demanding class there is, a professor who makes you question if you really have the brain for it. She slept 5 hours a night for 3 years straight. 3 years. Her whole body protested. Chronic neck pain, headaches that came so regularly she started giving names to the days, weight gain from cortisol stress, weak nails. But her mind, that mind that had learned that invisible could turn into extraordinary, had finally found its place. I drove down an avenue she knew well, and she told me something a lot of people never discover about themselves. I started realizing I wasn't bad at physics. I was bad at believing I deserved to be there. There is a giant difference, and that made total sense. Because look, how many times do we abandon something because we're afraid we don't deserve it, instead of abandoning it because we really can't do it? How many dreams die, not because they're impossible, but because we think people like us aren't appropriate for that? She was solving that equation, and the answer was brutal, because it meant she was going to have to rebuild not just her career, but her entire relationship with merit, with belonging, with the right to be in the places she occupied. In that period, she started making friends, not that superficial kind of friendship where you look good in photos, but friends who understood. One of them was a black woman who had come from Haiti. Another was an Asian girl whose parents wanted her to be a lawyer, but she secretly dreamed of engineering. They studied together, slept little together, ate cheap ramen together, and shared that kind of fear only those on the margins know. The fear of failing, of disappointing, of discovering that that place we managed to get into wasn't ours to begin with. And it was in that circle of girls who came from nowhere, who studied in the middle of the night, who sacrificed everything, that she started to understand she wasn't alone. That fight she thought was only hers was actually a collective fight. And when you discover you're at war alongside other people, you don't want to give up, because giving up now means giving up on them too. Here, the story picks up speed, like that moment when you're falling and suddenly feel something catching you. She joined a research group at college, and it was there she met people who had things she didn't have: latest generation laptops, access to top-tier simulators, contacts with professionals at big companies. But, and this is important, she had something none of them had: that hunger. It wasn't hunger for food, it was that hunger of someone who knows they only have one chance. While her classmates studied because it was a normal career, a life plan mapped out since they were little, she studied as if it were the last opportunity of her entire life, as if it were now or never. Like that edge you can't copy. It's an intensity that comes from knowing failure isn't just a low grade, it's going back to square one. A specific classmate, son of a diplomat, financially comfortable, that type who studied but without the existential desperation, was impacted by her performance. It wasn't admiration from afar. He really saw something in her, and they started studying together. She learned from the way he saw things. He learned from the way she didn't give up. And in that moment, he introduced her to his advisor professor, a man who was a researcher in aerospace engineering and had direct contacts with NASA. Like real contacts, not that kind of, oh, I have a friend who knows someone. This was the kind of contact that opens doors. And the professor said something that changed everything. You should be doing research to be close to this work, period. No beating around the bush, no maybe, no if you can. The raw, naked truth was there that she had what it took. She got into an undergraduate research program, a position that paid, but little. $8 an hour still. Same price as when she cleaned offices. But look at the difference. Now she was a junior engineer at the university. She had a researcher badge. She had an institutional email. She had legitimacy. The leap is invisible to those who don't live that reality. But for her, it was everything. Because that meant she wasn't the girl who worked anymore. She was a professional. She had credibility. She could put it on her resume. She could look forward without always looking back at the work that financed everything. I turned to her in that moment and said something I thought was important for her to hear. You know what the difference is between someone who comes from the bottom and someone who falls from the top. Someone who comes from the bottom knows exactly the value of every opportunity, because every single one costs something. And she nodded, because she knew that truth well. Because while her classmates saw that research program as just another item on the resume, she saw it as the bridge between invisible and visible, saw it as the document proving she belonged there. During that research period, she discovered something important, that networking isn't that fake thing where you go around meeting people at parties. Real networking is finding people who are on the path you want to follow, who have already passed the obstacles you're facing, and who genuinely want to help you because they understand what that fight is like. She started attending seminars, congresses, meetups, those places that exist but nobody poor knows exist. And there she found mentors, found allies, found the invisible network that sustains the world of science. Because there's a secret top universities don't tell you. You don't get in alone. You get in because someone inside opens the door. During that research program, she worked on a project optimizing solar panels for satellites. It wasn't something that was going to change the world. It wasn't that revolutionary discovery you see in movies. It was honest, solid work, that kind of thing that builds real engineering. But then something happened she had never experienced before. Her name came out in an academic publication. It wasn't a big deal to most people, just another paper among thousands published every year. But for her, it was everything. It was the first time in her life her name appeared on an official document of intellectual recognition. It wasn't a bank account with numbers. It wasn't an ID document that only proves you exist biologically. It was recognition that she had contributed knowledge, with ideas, with work, with thought, to something bigger than herself. Like that moment when you understand you're not invisible anymore, that you're leaving a mark. She showed that paper to the classmate who had helped her, that diplomat's son who had the openness to see potential in someone different. He laughed, but not in that way that hurts. It was that genuine way of joy, you know? That laugh you only do when you really love someone. And he said, "Now you're really here, for real." And she was. Because it wasn't a promise anymore. It wasn't, "You can do it if you study hard" anymore. It was proof, evidence, documented. She could show it to any person, any door she wanted to open, and that paper said, "This woman knows how to do things." She graduated in 2008, and here comes the detail that changes everything, right in the middle of the global financial crisis. That moment when the entire engineering market shrank, companies canceling projects, people with master's degrees couldn't get jobs. The timing was too terrible to be a coincidence. It seemed like the universe was running one last test, you know? Like, do you really want this? Because now it gets really hard. But she had one thing most graduates didn't have: experience working under extreme pressure, because she had already lived an entire life under extreme pressure. Unemployment? She already knew it. Uncertainty? It was her daily bread. Sacrifice? She had done so much that a little more wasn't going to kill anyone. I drove through Times Square at that moment in the story, and those immense buildings, all those lights, that organized chaos of New York, all of that reflected exactly where she had arrived. From a girl who had left Bogota with $300 to a graduated engineer. It might seem little to someone who never had to fight, but for someone who knows that reality, it's a mountain you climbed by hand. Every step cost blood, sweat, tears that weren't even shed because there was no time to cry. And it was around that time she started to understand something that would change how she related to success. That a small victory is still a victory. That recognition in an academic publication is worth as much as a promotion in a big company. That it doesn't need to be historic to be yours. Because that paper with her name, even if very few people read it, was proof she had done it, had studied, had dedicated herself, had deserved to be there. And nobody, not that calculus professor who suggested a appropriate technical program, not that society that thought a poor immigrant had to clean mansions for the rest of her life. Nobody could take that away from her. Grad school came fast, a master's at the same university, but now with a full scholarship because she had become a promising researcher. She wasn't that student nobody believed in anymore. Now doors opened. Her work was in space robotics. Exactly the thing that would be the gateway to NASA. It was as if every step she had taken, every night of study, every rejection, every invisibility she had turned into fuel, had been preparation for that moment. It's not coincidence, it's design, it's purpose. and she started to realize that maybe she had more control over her destiny than she imagined. But, and here comes the real part of the story, the fear still existed. It wasn't fear of starving anymore. It wasn't fear of sleeping on the street. It was a different fear, more sophisticated. It was the fear of not being good enough when she finally got there. Like that fear of a finalist you feel on your skin. You know you're close, you're so close you can smell it. But you also know the end is exactly where good, prepared people lose, where everything you built isn't enough. She told me she spent nights awake thinking, what if I get there and they realize I'm a fraud? What if they discover my accent is wrong, that my clothes are wrong, that I don't belong in this place? That kind of imposter syndrome that consumes people who came from the bottom and are in a place of privilege. It was around that time she met a professor who would change her perspective completely. The woman was also an immigrant from China, had been through similar things, and during a class asked a question that simply exploded in her head. Do you study astronautics or do you dream in astronautics? Crazy question, right? Because technically you do both. But she answered something I heard her repeat with that voice full of weight. I am in astronautics because I dreamed so hard I can't wake up. That professor, let's call her Dr. Chen, became her unofficial co-advisor. For 2 years, took her to international conferences, introduced her to the community of top researchers, made her tangible, real, visible to people who made decisions at NASA. I turned to her on that ride and dropped something I think it's important every person hears once in their life. Fear can only stop you if you believe it's right, if you believe you really don't deserve it. But when you know, not believe, but know that you worked harder than anyone, then fear just becomes noise. She took a deep breath because she recognized that truth in her own skin, because she had done the math. She knew how many hours she had studied, how many nights she didn't sleep, how many times she chose sacrifice when she could have chosen comfort. The fear was just static. Proof of that was that paper with her name, that researcher badge, that email arriving with opportunities. And in that moment, passing by the East River with that woman telling her story, I realized we had reached the critical point. The point where she wasn't the girl who cleans mansions studying at night anymore. She was the woman studying space robotics and cleaning mansions to make extra money. There is a subtle but profound difference, because one is a victim, someone who works because they need to. The other is strategy, someone who works while building something bigger. She had become the strategist of her own life. The interview for NASA happened in 2010. She walked into that room knowing exactly one thing nobody there could compete with. She had studied more than anyone sitting at that table. It wasn't arrogance, it was fact, pure math. While others read papers on the weekend, she read papers at dawn after working all day. While others rested, she kept going. While others had social lives, she had quantum physics. You can study engineering, or you can live engineering. She had chosen to live it, had chosen to breathe formulas, dream of satellites, wake up thinking about problems nobody else was thinking about. That wasn't common dedication, it was obsession. And obsession is what transforms a common person into an extraordinary one. But fear walked into that room with her. That fear you bring when you're in a place that maybe isn't yours. There was a panel of 5 people in the interview, 4 men and 1 woman, all with PhDs from top universities. The leader of the panel was a white man in his 60s, exactly that type that makes you remember teachers who underestimated you, who told you your place was a more appropriate trade school. And he started with a question that seemed casual. Tell us about your journey. Simple as that. A question any interviewer asks. But she knew that answer was everything. It was her chance to not be that girl with an accent, to not be the one who cleaned mansions, to be seen as an engineer. She took a breath, one of those breaths you only take when you're about to tell a truth that hurts, and started to speak. Not the polished version, the one that hides the struggle, not the version that pretends everything was easy. She told the raw truth. I arrived here with $300 in my pocket, cleaned offices at night while studying during the day, was rejected 14 times before getting a scholarship, and I am here because a woman believed in me when nobody else would bet a cent on me. Silence. That silence you can't read. Didn't know if it was silence of negative shock or if it was the impact of truth. The woman on the panel, the one who was a minority there too, smiled. The other men took notes. Because when you drop a truth that loud, people recognize it. Then he asked that question she knew was coming. Why do you think you can do work harder than what we've done? And here comes that answer she paused the story to look at me straight in the rearview mirror for, because that answer was everything. Because you guys had time to fail on tests. I only have one test in real life. Boom. It's right there. Right there is the difference between who grew up safe and who grew up with grit. Between who could mess up and try again, and who messed up once and went back to square one. She wasn't more qualified because she had studied more. She was more qualified because she had less margin for error. And in that moment, in that room in Manhattan, those 5 top professionals understood they were looking at someone different. I drove in silence for a few seconds after she finished telling that part, because I knew she had made it. That in that interview, she had done something few people managed to do. She had transformed her apparent weakness into undeniable strength, had turned that accent, that cleaning experience, that past of invisibility, into evidence that she deserved to be there. Not because it was charity, it was because she had proven it, with action, with documentation, with published research, with sleepless nights, with sacrifice nobody else had made. She got the spot at NASA. That call came on a normal Tuesday while she was at home. And when she heard the words, "Congratulations, you're hired," something inside her exploded. Not just joy, but relief. Confirmation of, I was right about myself. But here comes the part few understand about victory, that there is a weight after it. Because when you finally win, when you finally get there, that place that seemed impossible for so long suddenly gets small, and the anger comes back. That anger you saved for later, that you postponed while you were busy surviving, it comes back with force. Her first impulse when she got that call was to call the college, that department, and ask for the calculus professor who had underestimated her, the one who suggested the more appropriate technical program. She rehearsed mentally, had the speech ready in her head, like that villain speech you see in movies. "You were wrong, look at me now, I made it despite you." She visualized his face, imagined that mix of shame and reluctant admiration. Because there is something terrifying about being wrong when you are a person who is never questioned. She ran her finger down the contact list, knowing one call could undo the last 5 years of her building, because she could use that victory to destroy, or she could use it to build. But then, and this is the moment the story changes direction completely, the day before starting at NASA, she went to visit that apartment on 77th Street and Park Avenue, the house of that woman who saved her. The one who saw her studying quantum physics in the kitchen and decided to care. The woman was aged now, much more tired than the first time, but her eyes, those eyes that had seen potential when nobody else did, still had that shine. They drank tea. And the woman asked something simple but devastating. "And now, are you going for revenge or construction?" Period. That question hung floating between them like a heavy cloud. She spent days thinking about that question. Because revenge is easy, right? Revenge is fast. You call, you say it, you see the person's face drop, you feel that warm satisfaction of someone finally recognizing they were wrong about you. But it also turns empty afterwards. It turns into rancor, turns into energy spent destroying instead of building. So she did something few people managed to do. She chose construction. She didn't call the professor. Instead, she started discreetly to mentor young Latina women entering engineering. Like, not because she had an obligation, because she had the privilege of being able to do it. Because now she was on the other side of that table, on the side of who opens the door. And that was real power. Not power of destruction, power of creation. I remembered in that moment something I've seen happen many times in this taxi. People who reach the top and spend all their energy trying to push others down, and people who arrive and put a ladder up. She had chosen the ladder. She turned to me and said that sentence I felt was a truth so deep it deserved to be tattooed somewhere. Revenge is fast and leaves you empty. Construction is slow but makes you whole. And in that moment, I understood she hadn't just conquered engineering, she had conquered herself, had conquered that part that screams for quick justice, for destruction of the enemy, for validation through those who hurt her, had chosen validation through those she could help. She adjusted her posture in the back seat as we entered Queens, and in that moment, her voice came back to that present that started it all. That present of a woman who had just left a NASA office with promotion papers in her old bag covered in stickers. "Today I am a senior engineer responsible for the robotic arm of a space rover," she said, with that tone that wasn't arrogance, it was a declaration of fact. "I supervise projects involving people who studied at Harvard, at Stanford, at MIT, and you know the most interesting thing? None of them worked as hard as I did, not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't need to. They could simply study. I had to work and study at the same time." It wasn't a complaint. It was an observation. It was her simply naming the reality few people manage to name without bitterness. She told me that 3 weeks ago, that same woman from 77th Street, now 85 years old, still alive, still sharp, watched via live stream a NASA event where she presented an advance in robotic technology. She was at home, in that apartment that had been the bridge between two worlds, seeing her cleaning girl now on an international stage talking about innovation she helped create. And after she watched, that woman called, just said, "You touched Mars. You really touched Mars." And she cried. Not that performative victory cry. It was that cry you only do when your whole life, all of it, since that day at JFK with $300 to that day at NASA with the rover, when everything connects and finally makes sense. When you understand nothing was by chance, that every sacrifice had weight, that every invisibility was preparation. "You know what I learned?" she asked, looking at me straight in the rearview mirror with that shine she had at the start of the ride, but now was different. It was the shine of someone who crossed over, not someone who was arriving. That nobody is born too privileged to give up. But also, nobody is born so disadvantaged they can't make it. There is always a person somewhere who will believe. You just need to be open enough to recognize when that person arrives. And she completed, and you need to be willing to be that person for someone later. Because she had understood, and that understanding had taken everything she had, that the chain only continues if every person who climbs up offers a hand to the next one. I drove in silence for a few minutes while we passed through the streets of Queens. Because there was something sacred in that silence. There was something that didn't need words. She grabbed the old suitcase, the one full of stickers from countries she had visited after becoming a millionaire, not in money but in opportunity, that blouse with the NASA logo she wore as a victory uniform, and asked to get out, in front of a red brick building on a quiet avenue, probably where her parents lived now, or where she visited people who had been bridges. She got out of the car with lightness, like that movement of someone who no longer carries the weight of having to prove anything to anyone. She turned around before closing the door and said, "Thank you so much." It wasn't that courteous thank you. It was that heartfelt thank you, the one that comes out when you really feel it. I started to say it was all good, that it had been a privilege for me to listen, that she taught me more than I could have taught her, but she had already made that goodbye wave. That gesture of someone who knows well the feeling of having to go, of having commitments, of having a life to live. And while she disappeared into that red brick door, I stayed there in the car, with the engine running and that whole story still vibrating in the air. Now I ask you, and this question isn't rhetorical, it's for you to really think, what is your $300? What is that limited resource you're holding on to, hoping it's enough to start? What is rejection number 1 that is stopping you from trying? Number 2, number 3, number 14? If that woman made it with 0 contacts, 0 privilege, 0 safety net from family to catch a fall, what is your real excuse? Not the one you tell other people, but the one you whisper to yourself when nobody is listening? Because there is something I discovered in these 2 decades listening to stories. The people who make it aren't the smartest. They aren't the best looking. They aren't the ones who had the best start. They are the ones who decided that quitting for free wasn't an option. If this story touched you, if you recognized in some point of that journey your own story, or the story of someone you love and want to see fly, do this. Click the like button. Share this with whoever needs to hear that Mars is possible, that starting from nothing is starting from pure potential. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next rides, because every week there are people getting into this taxi with a story that will change your perspective on what is possible. And comment down below, what was the moment you decided that quitting for free wasn't an option? Who was that person who believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself? See you on the next ride.